Look, when the nations were shaken, an anointed man was sent. He was like a craftsman shouting in the wilderness, determined to repair the long, desolate city wall. From the moment he stepped into the palace, the golden horn had sounded, because 365 days, every day was engraved with the imprint of his hard work. The following are the 365 achievements made in the first 365 days after President Trump's return to office, an average of one great achievement a day. Ensure the security of the U.S. border and put the interests of the American people first. The negative growth of net migration by 2025 reversed the 50-year trend and restored control of migration flows in the United States for the first time in a generation. More than 2.6 million illegal immigrants have been repatriated from the United States through deportation and voluntary departure. More than 650,000 illegal immigrants have been arrested, detained, and deported, including the worst illegal immigration criminals such as murderers, rapists, gang members, and recidivists. More than 400,000 illegal immigrants accused or convicted of crimes have been repatriated. By ending the release incentive of the Biden era and restoring the credible consequences, 2 million people have been repatriated voluntarily, reducing the number of illegal border crossings to the lowest level since the 1970s, completely eradicated the illegal entry phenomenon of the Biden era, reduced the traffic of fentanyl on the southern border by 56%. The Biden administration permanently put an end to the nationwide dangerous caught and release policy, detaining illegal immigrants instead of releasing them to inland areas. As a result, the number of illegal immigrants released into the country decreased by 9% during Biden's administration. No illegal immigrants have been released into the country for 8 consecutive months, restoring border deterrent. On the first day, the national border was declared a state of emergency, mobilizing the power and resources needed to restore order without the need for new legislation. Deploy the National Guard and active duty troops to the southern border to support law enforcement and repel the invasion. The construction of the border wall, dozens of miles of new construction is underway or has been completed, including the ongoing new border barrier project in El Paso and the Grande Valley to protect the land from future invasion. The successful stay in Mexico policy has been restored to ensure that those who try to cross the border illegally cannot wait for the case to be resolved in the United States with little punishment. Transform the CBP-1 application, which failed in the Biden era, from a large-scale entry tool into a self-help repatriation facility. The flow of immigrants in Dalian Pass decreased by 99% year on year, curbing the influx of illegal immigrants from the source. More than 100,000 visas related to fraud, criminal activities, or national security issues have been revoked. Revoke visas related to pro-Hamas agitators on university campuses, and restore the security, freedom of speech, and American values in universities across the country. The visa processing of 75 high-risk countries has been suspended, waiting for the security review to be strengthened. More than 10,000 people associated with drug terrorism or drug trafficking groups have been prevented from entering the country. 206 million welfare eligibility reviews were conducted to ensure that taxpayer-funded projects only serve U.S. citizens and legal residents. Terminate the federal benefits of at least 1.4 million illegal immigrants who improperly receive public assistance. Reduce the number of newly enrolled foreign students in the United States by 17%. 275,000 illegal immigrants were removed from the Social Security roster, maintaining the integrity of the program through active recruitment and redeployment. ICE's law enforcement capabilities have been expanded, the number of employees has doubled, and more than 220,000 new ICE officer applications have been obtained, the largest recruitment pool in the agency's history. Expand the national federal detention capacity, including the opening of the largest immigration detention facility in American history, to ensure that detainees are detained rather than released back to our communities. In order to ensure road safety, commercial truck drivers are required to be able to speak English, resulting in more than 9,500 substandard foreign truck drivers to stop operating. The Office of Assistance for Victims of Immigrant Crimes of the Department of Homeland Security has been restored to provide direct support for victims of illegal immigration crimes. 62,000 missing migrant children were rescued from networks of trafficking, forced labor, and exploitation related to illegal immigrants, most of whom went missing during the Biden administration. Reduce the number of unaccompanied illegal immigrant children to the lowest level in history. Citing the enemy oversees Chinese law to expel the brutal Aragua train gang members. The Supreme Court upheld the decision to revoke the temporary protection status of more than 500,000 immigrants, immediately suspend the resettlement of refugees, and significantly reduce the number of refugees allowed to enter the United States to ensure that the United States does not become a safe haven for those who hate us. Temporary protection status has been terminated for several dangerous third world countries, including Somalia, Venezuela, and Haiti. 7 secure third country agreements were signed to promote and accelerate repatriation, and this authority was defended and won in the Supreme Court. Ensure that El Salvador agrees to accept deportees of any nationality, including violent criminals. 85,000 identity information has been added to the terrorist database of the National Counterterrorism Center. ICE has launched a database of the worst criminals to openly identify illegal immigrants who commit crimes. At a time when the immigration fraud scandal in Somalia broke out, an audit of Somali immigration cases began to determine whether there was systematic fraud and potential dispersal of citizenship. Financial support for federal left-wing non-governmental organizations that promote or encourage illegal immigration has been terminated. 5 national defense zones have been established on the southern border to reduce illegal drug and human smuggling and to minimize environmental damage and erosion caused by cross-border traffic, garbage, and vehicle traffic. Restrict the entry of nationals from countries with a high incidence of terrorism. For the so-called shelter jurisdiction, provide a safe harbor for illegal immigrants who commit crimes by cutting grants and other discretionary grants. A fee of $100,000 will be charged for the H-1B application for accompanying or supplementing the application. Multiple lawsuits have been filed against states and cities that obstruct federal immigration laws. Carry out continuous internal law enforcement actions in the so-called shelter city to remove thousands of criminal illegal immigrants from our streets. Force Canada and Mexico to take practical measures to combat the smuggling of fentanyl into the United States. In order to prevent illegal immigrants and fentanyl smuggling into China, we have imposed a 10% tariff on imported goods from China. Severe sanctions have been imposed on some of the world's deadliest drug trafficking groups. The Laken-Riley Act was signed, which stipulates that illegal immigrants arrested or accused of theft or violence must be detained in memory of Laken Riley, a Georgia college student who was brutally killed by an illegal immigrant who was released to the country. Instruct the Ministry of Justice to seek the death penalty for felony committed by illegal immigrants. Immediately sign an administrative order to terminate the birth citizenship of the children of illegal immigrants. A large number of deported illegal immigrant murderers, rapists, and drug dealers, including dozens of convicted murderers, pedophiles, child pornographers, gang members, terrorists, drug dealers, and others who pose an imminent threat to public safety. Revitalization of community security. By launching targeted federal anti-crime operations, it ended the non-law enforcement policy of the Biden era and achieved the largest one-year reduction in murders in American history. It reversed the trend of a surge in violent crime across the country, resulting in a 6%, 19%, and 10% decline in rape, robbery, and aggravated assault cases nationwide, respectively. Compared with last year, the number of drug overdose deaths has decreased by 21%. And since President Trump took office, the number of drug overdose deaths has been declining every month. Fentanyl was designated as a weapon of mass destruction to quickly disintegrate the drug trafficking network. Under supervision, the death toll of law enforcement officers on duty decreased by 25%. The Washington, D.C. Security and Beauty Working Group was established with more than 7,500 arrests, 735 illegal guns seized, more than 80 homeless camps that contributed to crime and chaos, and reduced murders by more than 60% after federal intervention. The Memphis Security Working Group was established to combat violent crime, reduce the number of murders to the lowest level in 20 years, and reduce the number of shootings by 40%. Targeted law enforcement operations in Chicago have reduced the number of murders in the city to the lowest level since 1965, and the number of shootings has fallen by more than a third. Targeted law enforcement action in New Orleans has reduced the city's homicide rate to its lowest level in 50 years. By identifying drug cartels as terrorist organizations, the Aragua Train, MS-13, and other transnational gang criminal networks were disintegrated. The number of traffic deaths nationwide fell sharply, partly due to President Trump's massive eviction and repatriation of commercial truck drivers who do not speak English. Under supervision, the number of illegal immigrants visiting the emergency room has been significantly reduced, thus unlocking key resources to better serve U.S. citizens in need of emergency medical services. Identify the anti-fascist movement as a domestic terrorist organization and investigate the source of funds for its radical left. The number of the top 10 wanted FBI prisoners arrested reached a record more than the number of people arrested during Biden's administration in just 1 year. It strengthens the ability of state and local law enforcement to hunt down criminals and protect innocent U.S. citizens. Rebuild the economy for American workers. Gasoline prices have fallen to their lowest level in nearly 5 years, with gasoline prices below $3 per gallon in 43 states and below $2 per gallon in 19 states. Deregulation, tax cuts, and the restoration of investment confidence have created 654,000 jobs in the private sector. Through the strict implementation of immigration laws, it is ensured that 100% of new jobs are assigned to people born in the United States. Huge economic growth has been achieved, with real GDP growth of 4.3% in the third quarter of 2025, far exceeding the expectations of economists and laying the foundation for future growth. As President Trump's policies continue to take effect, the GDP is expected to be higher in the fourth quarter. Witnessed the largest increase in blue-collar wages in the past 60 years. The real income of the private sector increased by $1,100 a year, a part of the purchasing power of $2,900 lost to workers during Biden's administration. Since President Trump took office, inflation has been controlled at only 2.4%, down 70% from the peak of the Biden era. By implementing fiscal austerity policies, reversing uncontrolled spending growth, and restoring policy credibility, inflation has been controlled, and the core inflation rate has been pushed to a multi-year low. By stabilizing mortgages to support the securities market and expanding liquidity, the lowest mortgage interest rate in 3 years has been achieved, reducing monthly housing payments to the most affordable level in more than 2 years. The growth rate of secondhand housing sales has reached the strongest level in 3 years, and the revenue growth has finally exceeded the increase in house prices. The stock market has rebounded historically, and major stock indices have repeatedly reached new highs. The Working Family Tax Reduction Act was signed, the largest tax cut for the middle class in modern American history, and saved 5.9 million jobs. He fulfilled his promise of no tax on tips during the election. He fulfilled his promise of no overtime tax during the campaign. He fulfilled his campaign promise to not tax Social Security funds for our great elderly people. It has brought unprecedented tax breaks to small businesses and other key industries, consolidated the successful Tax Reduction and Employment Act during its first term, and opened the door to a higher level of prosperity in the future. Successfully pushed Congress to pass a $9 billion reduction plan to permanently eliminate wasteful spending, such as wasting taxpayers' money to fund NPR and PBS. Through a $5 billion temporary cancellation plan, wasteful foreign aid projects that are inconsistent with the America First principle have been terminated. After the Trump administration's intervention, supply stability, and regulatory relaxation, the wholesale price of eggs fell by 89%. The nominal weekly wages of the private sector increased by 4%, far exceeding the inflation rate. Instruct credit card companies to set the interest rate ceiling at 10% to reduce the debt burden of the American people. The U.S. trade deficit was reduced to its lowest level since 2009 through tariff enforcement and equal trade pressures. Launched the largest deregulation program in the history of the United States, saving $5 trillion. Create Trump accounts to empower the next generation of Americans by setting up tax advance savings accounts for newborns, which are expected to provide them with up to $300,000 in funding by their 18th birthday. Trump's account received overwhelming support from the private sector. Michael and Susan Dell donated $6.25 billion, and large enterprises such as SoFi, Joshin Wealth Management, and Charter Communications also matched the federal government's $1,000 for employees. Donate. It attracted about $10 trillion in new domestic investment, leaving jobs in the United States and reviving the U.S. manufacturing industry. Through the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Emergency Assistance Program, U.S., farmers were provided with $12 billion in urgently needed direct aid to help farmers and ranchers recover from the damage caused by the Biden administration. Negotiations with China and Bangladesh have reached a large-scale soybean procurement agreement, reopening key export markets. Approved $50 billion for rural health care, the largest investment in rural hospitals in history. The rate of rent growth fell to the lowest level since 2021. The number of first-time weekly applications for unemployment benefits has fallen to the lowest level in many years. Take measures to reduce the cost of housing, authorize the purchase of mortgage bonds supported by the Ministry of Finance, and call for a ban on large institutional investors from buying housing supplies in large quantities. This is the strongest year for new car sales since 2019. Ford has achieved the best annual sales in 6 years. General Motors reported that overall sales soared, while Stellantis' Jeep brand sales increased for the first time since 2018. It has led the decline in the price of new and used cars. It overturned the cumbersome fuel economy standards of the Biden era, which would have increased the cost of an average new car by nearly $1,000, thus saving consumers billions of dollars. The opening of the Ocean State Monument, a remote Pacific island for commercial fishing, overturned an absurd ban in the Biden era and promoted the economic development of American Samoa and other Pacific islands. Take administrative measures to restore the competitiveness of U.S. seafood by reducing the regulatory burden, cracking down on unfair foreign trade practices, and improving the production and export of domestic seafood. Defend American workers and American industry. A fair and mutually beneficial trade program was launched to make it clear to the world that the United States would no longer tolerate exploitation, and instructed its governments to deal with non-reciprocal trade barriers and strive for fairer market access for U.S. exports. New and improved trade agreements have been reached with major trading partners of the United States, whose GDP accounts for more than half of the global GDP, including the United Kingdom, the European Union, Japan, China, South Korea, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, Israel, Switzerland, the Philippines, and Cambodia. Tariff revenue has soared, and $300 billion in tariffs have been imposed under the impetus of expanded law enforcement and new policies. The trade deficit fell to the lowest level since 2009, It has brought U.S. exports to the second highest level in history, the resumption of 25% tariffs on steel imports and a 25% tariff on aluminum imports to protect these important American industries from unfair foreign competition, a move that has been praised by the Steelmakers Association, the Aluminum Industry Association, and businesses across the country. Invoke Article 232 tariffs to protect key minerals and semiconductor supply chains in the United States. The growth of the federal deficit has been slowed down by cutting spending and limiting discretionary spending. The skills training program has been expanded through the Ministry of Labor's funding and administrative guidance. After the government introduced incentives for backflow production, the United States approved a number of major automobile manufacturing expansion plans. New heavy equipment and home appliance manufacturing plants have been approved in several states. Expand domestic semiconductor manufacturing capacity through trade, law enforcement, and industrial policies. Finally, the TikTok National Security Agreement was finalized, placing the platform under the U.S. ownership, thus protecting American data and weakening China's influence. Instruct the Treasury to stop producing 1-cent coins. The manufacturing cost of each coin is 3.69 cents. To eliminate the ongoing losses of taxpayers and modernize American coins. Ordering the Consumer Financial Protection Agency, Elizabeth Warren's idea, which once transferred funds to left-wing advocacy groups, to stop operating, ending the Biden era of regulatory weapons against legitimate lenders and raising consumer costs. The suspension of the enforcement of the Overseas Anti-Corruption Act through executive orders has reduced the excessive expansion of extraterritorial jurisdiction, thereby weakening the disadvantage of U.S. companies in overseas competition. After President Trump suspended trade negotiations, he forced Canada to withdraw the digital service tax, thus protecting American technology companies from discriminatory foreign taxes. The U.S. Department of Agriculture's National Agricultural Security Action Plan has been launched to regard food and agriculture as national security and strengthen supply chains to resist foreign hostile forces. A far-sighted plan has been formulated to establish a sovereign wealth fund to maximize the management of more than $5 trillion in assets held by the United States and enhance the country's financial resilience. It achieved the strongest first-year economic performance in modern history, combining lower inflation and energy costs with tax breaks, investment, and America First trade enforcement. In order to boost the U.S. film industry, it was announced that new tariffs would be imposed on foreign films. Sign an executive order to restore a strong domestic production base for prescription drugs and promote the domestic production of key drugs, which will bring billions of dollars of new investment to the United States from domestic and foreign pharmaceutical companies. Launch a localized portal to connect small businesses with more than 1 million domestic suppliers and manufacturers. Stimulate American innovation in science and technology. It has consolidated the global leadership of the United States in the field of artificial intelligence, attracting $2.7 trillion US of investment in technology and artificial intelligence. Through the president's direct involvement and continuous advocacy of Pennsylvania's resources, $90 billion in artificial intelligence and energy investment has been obtained in Pennsylvania alone. An agreement was reached that the U.S. government would acquire 10% of the shares of chip manufacturer Intel, and Intel's stock price has roughly doubled since then. Launched the Presidential Artificial Intelligence Challenge, inviting primary and secondary school students and educators from all over the United States to participate. Expand the scope of spectrum access through FCC's actions and reduce the cost of wireless telephone packages. The FCC's Building America agenda has been launched, expanded wireless competition, and accelerated the construction of high-speed infrastructure. The U.S. Space Command announced that it would move to Huntsville, Alabama, which would create 30,000 jobs and hundreds of billions of dollars in investment. NASA announced that the United States will return to the moon before President Trump leaves office. Announced the U.S. Artificial Intelligence Action Plan to maintain the dominant position of the United States in the field of artificial intelligence. The signing of the bill repeals the DeFi cryptocurrency broker rules that were too strict in the Biden era, which marks the first time the president has signed the cryptocurrency bill to take effect. Established strategic Bitcoin reserves to manage U.S. crypto assets seized through criminal or civil asset confiscation procedures. The Genius Act was signed to make it law, and the first stable currency regulatory framework in the United States was established. The Throat Strangulation Operation 2 is over, which is the crackdown on digital assets in the Biden era. Reaffirm the leadership of the United States on the world stage. The war between Israel and Hamas has been ended through the implementation of a ceasefire framework, ensuring the release of hostages and the development of a landmark Gaza peace plan, thereby bringing comprehensive security and prosperity to all people in the region. It contributed to the end of the 12-day war between Israel and Iran, promote peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan. It has contributed to peace between India and Pakistan, promote peace between the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda, promote peace between Cambodia and Thailand. Under the Good Exil, Kosovo and Serbia have normalized relations, contribute to peace between Egypt and Ethiopia. A U.S.-backed framework for ending the Ukraine-Russia war has been established, and enforceable ceasefire benchmarks and reconstruction incentives have been set. Resume the extreme pressure on Iran. Iran's nuclear weapons capabilities have been destroyed through coordinated military operations, escalation of sanctions, and intelligence operations. The Secretary of State was instructed to announce that the U.S. foreign policy would always put the United States and American citizens first. Announced that all foreign policies must be carried out under the guidance of the president and ensure that professional diplomats always reflect the foreign policy of the United States. The process of building the next generation Golden Dome missile defense system was launched to protect our homeland from the threat of the 21st century, and the initial funds were won in the Wage Family Tax Reduction Act. 29 new drug and transnational organized crime rewards have been added, including the highest award in the program's history, a $50 million reward for the now arrested drug terrorism dictator Nicolas Maduro. The success of NATO member states reached an agreement to increase defense spending to 5% of GDP, an extraordinary foreign policy feat that has long been considered impossible to achieve. Pressure on Panama's President Jose Raul Molino to withdraw from China's Belt and Road Initiative. The Belt and Road Initiative is a debt trap diplomatic plan used by the Communist Party of China to influence developing countries. The United States authorized deadly strikes on the ships of drug trafficking terrorists supplying fentanyl to the United States, resulting in the deaths of at least 123 drug trafficking terrorists. A ceasefire agreement was reached with Yemen's Houthis, restoring the freedom of navigation of ships with American flags in the Red Sea. Re-recognize the Iranian-backed Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization. The successful arrest of the long-runly wanted drug terrorist Nicolas Maduro paved the way for his prosecution in the United States. Signed a joint statement of intent with Canada and Finland to increase the production of icebreakers and counteract Russia's influence in the Arctic. An agreement has been reached with Venezuela to transfer 30 million to 50 million barrels of sanctioned oil to the United States, seize the sanctioned Venezuelan tankers, and cut off the Maduro regime's funding. Sanctions on Venezuela's secret oil fleet have weakened the regime's illegal source of income. Comprehensive sanctions have been imposed on the Iranian regime and its allies. He killed Abdullah Maki Musla-Rife, the head of global operations of the Islamic State, who is the second person in the Islamic State. The ISIS-K terrorists who planned to kill 13 American soldiers in Abiman were arrested. The leader of al-Qaeda's branch, Bilal Hassan Jassim, was shot in northwestern Syria, successfully rescued 85 U.S. citizens detained overseas. Through direct diplomatic pressure, political prisoners in Nicaragua and Venezuela were released. The Egyptian and Jordanian branches of the Muslim Brotherhood were listed as foreign terrorist organizations on the grounds that they supported Hamas. The United States has identified more than a dozen major drug trafficking groups in Latin America as terrorist organizations, expanding the anti-terrorism power of the United States. Ordered the United States to launch airstrikes on the ISIS leadership in Nigeria to protect the Christian community. The Indo-Pacific Alliance was rebuilt by restoring U.S. deterrence and concluding new security and trade agreements. Against the background of increasing racial discrimination in South Africa, the first batch of African refugees from South Africa arrived in the United Kingdom, and the United Kingdom warmly welcomed them. Expand the scope of application of the Abraham Agreement to Kazakhstan. The unprecedented reorganization of the State Council has been launched to reverse the situation in which decades of institutional bloat and the prevalence of bureaucracy have led to its inability to fulfill its important diplomatic mission. The Biden administration has ensured the safe return of NASA astronauts who have been trapped in space for 9 months, guided the formulation of the Maritime Action Plan to revital the U.S. shipbuilding industry and ensure the maritime hegemony of the United States. It stopped waste, fraud, and abuse within the United States Agency for International Development, ensuring that taxpayers no longer need to pay for deep-rooted bureaucratic self-interest projects such as sex reassignment surgery in Guatemala. It is forbidden to provide funds to the United Nations, UNRWA, a United Nations agency that has employed hundreds of Hamas and jihadists. Sanctions against the International Criminal Court for illegally exercising jurisdiction to interfere in the internal affairs of the United States. Reinstate Mexico City policy to ensure that taxpayers' money is not used to support foreign organizations that carry out or actively promote abortions in other countries. Order embassies around the world to fly only the American flag, not any radical flag. Rejoin the Geneva Declaration of Consensus, which aims to promote and strengthen the opportunities of women and girls around the world and to protect the status of the family as a basic unit of society. Build a stronger and more modern army. By restoring the pride of the Army, remuneration, and the clarity of the mission, the armed forces have been restored to excellent combat standards, thus achieving or exceeding the conscription targets of all military types. We have made the largest military investment in decades, using cutting-edge technology to modernize our troops, rebuild depleted stocks, and ensure that our troops have the best equipment in history. Modernize the military capabilities of the United States by accelerating the research and development of weapons and reforming the procurement process. Integrate artificial intelligence into U.S. defense planning and battlefield operations. By reversing the trend of declining pluralistic policies and combat readiness in the Biden era, the overall level of military combat readiness has been improved. Nearly 1.5 million active duty soldiers were given $1,776 in military dividends. Through management reform and accountability, the backlog of Veterans Affairs welfare was reduced by 60%, while before that, the backlog increased by 24% during Biden's administration. In the past year, the Department of Veterans Affairs has processed a record 3 million applications for disability compensation for veterans. 25 new Department of Veterans Affairs medical clinics have been opened to expand access for veterans. In fiscal year 2025, the Department of Veterans Affairs provided permanent housing to 51,936 homeless veterans across the country through its services, the highest number in 7 years. The military composition and welfare qualifications of soldiers retired due to the COVID-19 vaccine mandate in the Biden era have been restored. Transgender people are prohibited from joining the U.S. military. The physical fitness and grooming guidelines of the U.S. Army have been thoroughly reformed to ensure that the troops meet the highest possible standards. Stop using taxpayers' money to perform sex reassignment surgery for soldiers. Instruct the Ministry of War to stop its absurd diversity, fairness, and inclusiveness measures which hinder the military from completing their tasks. Reform the protection measures for veterans' housing loans to prevent the foreclosure of veterans' housing. Reduce the homelessness of veterans through coordinated cooperation between the federal and state governments. Strengthen the military support plan and welfare. Sign an executive order to exempt institutions that undertake national security missions from complying with the requirements of federal collective bargaining to strengthen border security, national security, and energy security. Expanded the foundation of the U.S. defense industry to reduce dependence on foreign suppliers. Strengthen the network defense of the United States to resist foreign attacks. In view of the fact that the awakening ideology has permeated U.S. military colleges and universities for many years, the advisory committees of the Army, Air Force, Navy, and Coast Guard were ordered to be immediately disbanded. In memory of the heroes of World War II, Fort Liberty in North Carolina was restored and renamed Fort Bragg. Fort Moore, Georgia, was renamed Fort Benning in memory of a World War I hero. Expand the U.S. space security program to protect U.S. satellites. Cut off the global terrorist financing network through the Ministry of Finance sanctions. In order to reduce the theft of intellectual property rights by the Communist Party of China, dozens of Chinese companies have been blacklisted. Strengthen intelligence sharing with U.S. allies. The F-47, the world's first sixth-generation fighter, was released. The Air Force National Guard base in Selfridge, Michigan, announced that the base will soon become a garrison for the new F-15EW Eagle II fighter. Meetings have been held with the leaders of dozens of countries, exceeding the total number of meetings held by Biden and Obama during their respective presidential terms. In recognition of the role played by the United States in winning these two world wars, May 8 was designated as Victory Day of World War II, and November 11 was designated as Victory Day of World War I. Let the government serve the people. It is estimated that the Trump administration has saved $215 billion by improving government efficiency, which is equivalent to saving $1,335 per American taxpayer. It signed 228 executive orders, quickly implementing the core promises of the campaign without any delay or deviation, the largest number of executive orders signed in a single term in decades. In the entire bureaucracy, the discriminatory diversity, fairness, and inclusiveness offices, employees, and practices have been abolished, and merit-based recruitment has been restored. Cancel all recruitment preferences based on race and gender in the administrative department. Instruct agencies to disband the federal censorship agency in the Biden era and restore the protection of freedom of speech. Through executive orders and regulatory law enforcement, the federal government's funding for chemical and surgical sex reassignment of minors has been terminated, thereby pushing the medical system across the country to stop these harmful surgeries on minors. The unfair and degrading practice of forcing women and men to compete in sports has ended, which has prompted the NCAA to revise the rules, and local and state sports organizations have followed suit. The official policy of the U.S. government is to set only two genders. Americans who were wrongly targeted by the Biden administration and were pardoned against abortion. A comprehensive investigation into the abuse of power by the deep government, ending the era of government weaponization and restoring the fairness and trust of American institutions. Introduce a new merit-based federal recruitment program to ensure that the government's recruitment decisions are entirely based on ability, including the Federal Aviation Administration, and the Biden administration has specially recruited people with intellectual disabilities and mental illness. It has significantly reduced the size of the federal bureaucracy to ensure that the government serves the taxpayers who support it by reducing the long-standing waste, fraud, and abuses. Tens of thousands of contracts with federal agencies have been terminated, saving taxpayers billions of dollars in waste, fraud, and misuse of money. The heavy electric vehicle injunct was repealed and consolidated into law by signing a congressional resolution drastically reduce employment-killing regulations to unleash innovation potential, reduce costs, and put the interests of American workers first. Federal regulations have been repealed at a staggering rate of 129 to 1, far faster than cutting red tape during Trump's first presidential term. Implement nationwide election integrity measures through administrative orders, prohibit foreign citizens from interfering in elections, strengthen the verification of voter citizenship, prosecute non-citizen voting, require verifiable paper ballot records from voters, and ensure that states comply with federal laws. An executive order was signed to require the adoption of classical architectural styles in federal public buildings, such as courts and government buildings, to respect tradition, cultivate citizens' pride, and inspire citizens. After investing more than 40 years and $3 trillion in the field of education with almost no results, the process of closing the Ministry of Education and returning the right to education to the states was officially launched. Sign an executive order to abolish the review system. An administrative order to protect religious freedom was signed. Sign an executive order to guarantee the rights granted by the Second Amendment to the Constitution. All files related to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy were made public without any deletion. A large number of previously classified archives related to the assassination of Senators Robert F. Kennedy and Dr. Martin Luther King and the disappearance of Amelia Earhart were released. The notorious drug addict and liar Hunter Biden was deprived of the protection of the taxpayer-funded CIA. Instruct the government to take all necessary measures to defend the constitutional rights of U.S. citizens and prevent them from being violated. Sign an administrative order prohibiting the use of paper straws. Stop providing federal funds to foreign countries for dangerous functional gain research. Instruct all federal agencies to protect religious expressions in the workplace. Compared with the previous year, the number of calls from the Social Security Department increased by 65%. Reduce the average answering speed of calls from customers of the Social Security Department to a number of digits. While fulfilling President Trump's promise not to cut welfare, strengthen Social Security for our great elderly. The exemption to allow certain colleges and universities to divert federal funds that were originally used for low-income and disabled students to illegal immigrants was revoked. Cancel taxpayer-sponsored mortgages for illegal immigrants. Shut down the work plan of the Climate Legion that wastes resources in the Biden era. The Federal Administrative College, which wasted resources, was disbanded and became a training base for bureaucrats. Pursuing the discriminatory, diversity, fairness, and inclusiveness policies of higher education institutions and the responsibility of letting anti-Semitism grow on their campuses have contributed to reconciliation with Northwestern University, Cornell University, University of Virginia, Brown University, Columbia University, and the University of Pennsylvania. Sign an executive order prohibiting schools that receive federal funding from compulsory vaccination against COVID. 1-9. Restore the name of McKinley Mountain, the highest peak in North America. It reversed the large-scale excessive expansion of the IRS during the Biden administration. After the Ministry of the Interior officially changed the name in its map database, this day was declared Gulf of America Day. Designate English as the official language of the United States. Developed retire.opm.gov, a reconceived website that can automatically handle federal retirement matters. Retirement records have been stored in underground mines for decades. The significant decline in the number of employees in the supervision of the federal government has reduced the waste and bloat that has long plagued the federal bureaucracy. compulsory bureaucrats to return to the office, and the proportion of federal employees working in the office is expected to increase by 30% by the second quarter of 2025. The security permissions of more than 100 members of the deep government who weaponized and politicized intelligence were revoked, including Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Alvin Bragg, Jack Sullivan, Hillary Clinton, Letitia James, Liz Cheney, John Bolton, Adam Kinzinger, Anthony Blinken, James Clapper, and Fiona Hill. An executive order was signed to modernize the U.S. workforce plan and prepare citizens for future high-paying technical jobs. The key reports canceled by the Biden administration were restored, including the cattle report in July and the county crop and livestock estimates, providing farmers with the data they need to make important business decisions. A board member of the Trump Kennedy Center was fired for his obsession with using taxpayers' money to continue radical left-wing ideology. The average disaster loan approval time has been shortened to only 17 days, which has accelerated the recovery of affected communities. A plan to radically reform the National Air Traffic Control System was announced based on unprecedented actions taken to ensure U.S. airspace safety and improve air travel. Under Chapter 6 of the Civil Rights Act, dozens of investigations have been conducted against institutions of higher education, alleging them of improper use of racial exclusion benefits, racial-based scholarships, and or racial-based segregation. The White House Faith Office was established to protect the religious freedom of Americans, maintaining the most transparent and approachable image of the government in modern history. President Trump's speech lasted more than 13,400 minutes and communicated with the media in 74% of the activities. The number of licensed journalists in the White House press conference room has been significantly increased to ensure that Americans of all backgrounds can keep in touch with the government. The press privileges of about 440 journalists who had previously tried to be muled by the Biden administration have been restored. Order the immediate declassification of all FBI documents related to the false Crossfire hurricane investigation. Forced many companies, including Disney and Goldman Sachs, to stop harmful, awakened, and discriminatory, pluralistic, fair, and inclusive practices. The automatic start and stop requirement for unpopular vehicles has been canceled, which has pushed up the cost. Authorized to produce affordable and efficient mini cars, which overturned the cumbersome regulations that hindered their production. Instruct the federal Ghazi office to speed up publication and reduce costs so that agencies can restore freedom faster and more effectively through President Trump's deregulation agenda. After 5 years of suspension, resume the collection of defaulting student loan borrowers and remind institutions to fulfill their obligations to support student loan borrowers. The exemption to allow California and more than a dozen other states to set their own emission standards and regulations for the sale of electric vehicles was revoked. Federal agencies are ordered to recruit only one new employee for every 4 retired employees. Sign executive orders to protect U.S. bank accounts from waste, fraud, and abuse, and modernize payments. Force Citibank to stop its restrictive and politically motivated debanking policy. Sign an executive order to remove anti-American propaganda from federal museums and national parks. An executive order was signed to ensure that anyone would not be convicted of violating regulations that they did not know existed. Strengthen law enforcement to ensure that states properly guarantee eligible Americans access to SNAP benefits in accordance with the law. A comprehensive review of the so-called gender affirmation therapy was released and found that there was no strong medical or scientific evidence to support the irreversible effect of the treatment. All Beagle experiments in the National Institutes of Health campus have been terminated. Stop the Biden-era ban on the use of fossil fuels in federal buildings to ensure that federal buildings use the most effective energy sources to reduce taxpayer costs and curb overregulation. Instruct states to maximize the choices for parents so that they can choose the best and safest schools for their children. order the automatic repeal of outdated regulations on U.S. energy production and innovation. An administrative order was signed to comprehensively reform the National Higher Education Certification System to ensure that colleges and universities provide high quality and high value education free from illegal discrimination and ideological prejudice. A landmark executive order was signed abolishing the so-called differential impact liability, which undermines civil rights by achieving preset and race-oriented results through forced discrimination. Strengthen the probationary period of the federal government, ensure that the federal government's workforce serves the American people on the principle of merit-based recruitment. A huge new American flag was erected on the lawn of the White House as a symbol of America's strength. President Trump's cabinet members were confirmed at the cabinet level in the Senate faster than any government in recent years, and most members of the presidential cabinet were confirmed in the first month. Let the United States be healthy again. Implement the most freed nation drug pricing policy and reach an agreement with the world's 16 largest pharmaceutical companies to ensure that Americans can enjoy the same low-priced drugs as other developed countries. The Presidential Committee on Sports, Fitness, and Nutrition has been reorganized, and the iconic presidential fitness test for American teenagers has been restored. The Whole Milk for Children's Health Act was signed to restore the provision of whole milk and 2% low-fat milk to schools to improve children's nutritional status. 8 kinds of artificial edible pigments have been phased out, and 4 natural substitutes have been approved. Remarkable progress has been made in the effort to make America healthy again. About 40% of the U.S. food industry, including large companies such as Walmart, Hershey, and Nestle, have agreed to eliminate artificial colors in their products. Launched the Big Health Care Plan, a comprehensive reform framework aimed at reducing drug prices, premiums, and out-of-pocket expenses. The announcement of the launch of the Stork Express operation aims to expand the range of safe, reliable, and nutritious baby formula for American families. Sign an executive order to reclassify marijuana as a Class 3 controlled drug to speed up access to medical research and patients. An executive order was signed to modernize the foster care system and expand support for adolescents leaving the foster care system. Children's vaccination recommendations have been changed from 72 doses of vaccines for 17 diseases to 11 consensus vaccines, and other vaccines can be obtained according to the requirements of parents after communication with doctors. Take administrative measures to expand the universal coverage of in vitro fertilization, IVF. The funding of the Children's Cancer Data Program has doubled. 67 new drugs were approved, exceeding the 5-year and 20-year average. A $50 million autism data science program was launched to reveal the causes and improve the effectiveness of treatment. It was announced to invest $61.9 million to strengthen the nutrition of the Enlightenment program to expand access to fresh and healthy food for more than 100,000 families. The Let America Healthy Again Committee was established to investigate and solve the root causes of the growing health crisis in the United States, initially focusing on chronic diseases in children. Several exemption agreements have been signed to authorize states to remove junk food from their SNAP welfare programs. Remove the COVID-19 vaccine from the list of vaccines recommended for healthy children and pregnant women. Start publishing taxpayer-funded research reports online for free to enhance the ability of the American people to do independent research and promote maximum transparency. It has closed the legal loopholes that allow food raw material producers to use chemicals with unknown safety data in food. New research has been launched to study autism in more depth. The United States withdrew from the World Health Organization. A breakthrough new dietary guideline has been issued giving priority to complete and nutritious food, real food, rather than processed junk food. Cancel the black box warning of menopausal hormone therapy to enhance the convenience of women's access to health services. instructs the full implementation of the Hyde Amendment, which prohibits the use of taxpayers' money to finance or promote selective abortion. Unleash the dominance of U.S. energy and common sense. Immediately declare a national energy emergency to release the full energy potential of the United States and reduce the energy costs of American households. It set a new record for the export of liquefied natural gas, becoming the first country in history to export more than 100 million metric tons of LNG in a single year, overturning the Biden-era drilling restrictions and approving nearly 6,000 permits for drilling oil and gas on federal and Native American land, an increase of 55% over the same period, 2024 to 2025, reopen hundreds of millions of acres of land for oil, natural gas, and coal production. The announcement of the opening of 13.1 million acres of federal land for coal leasing is 3 times the benchmark set by a grand bill and implements President Trump's instructions to restore U.S. energy dominance. By expanding the scope of leasing and licensing, a record high of domestic oil and gas production has been achieved. With the licensing and financing support of the Ministry of Energy, several approved advanced nuclear energy projects will be put into operation by the 4th of July, 2026, revive the beautiful, clean coal industry in the United States, invest hundreds of millions of dollars to increase coal production, and cancel decades of excessive regulation. Hundreds of green new scams projects in the Biden era have been terminated, including the $7.5 billion federal electric vehicle charging pile program, which has only built 8 electric vehicle charging stations as of May 2024. The National Energy Leadership Committee was established at the White House to provide advice on achieving energy dominance. Instruct the government to quickly implement the most effective mechanisms, barriers, and other measures to prevent the migration and spread of invasive carp in the Great Lakes Basin and surrounding areas. Action was taken to revoke the 2009 Barack Hussein Obama era of harm, which caused trillions of dollars in regulatory costs. The removal of the costly average fuel economy SDA fee standard for enterprises in the Biden era will save Americans $109 billion in the next 5 years. Give consumers a greater choice of daily necessities such as cars, straws, shower heads, toilets, washing machines, light bulbs, stoves, and dishwashers, saving American consumers tens of billions of dollars. The water-free pressure standards that will reduce the efficiency of household appliances and increase their costs have been abolished. Withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement and dozens of globalist climate organizations, 28.3 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, and 1.6 billion barrels of previously undiscovered oil were found in the Permian Basin. The success prompted large technology companies to bear the full power costs of their data centers, returning tens of billions of dollars of green new scam expenditure to American taxpayers. By drastically reducing red tape, the construction of various key infrastructure projects, including the South Bay International Sewage Treatment Plant in San Diego and the I-40 highway in North Carolina, has been accelerated. The requirement for diesel exhaust gas treatment fluid was lifted, saving $727 million a year for family farms. The construction of offshore wind turbines, which are expensive and harmful to the environment, has been stopped. More than $350 million in revenue through oil and gas leasing sales, more than the total revenue of the Biden administration's 4-year term. A path aimed at allowing agencies to complete licensing reform at record speed has been launched to resist environmental regulations that are used to hinder economic growth. A historic energy export agreement was signed, including a $100 billion agreement with South Korea and a $200 billion agreement with the Japanese energy company JERA. Accelerate uranium mining, a move to strengthen national security by reducing dependence on foreign suppliers. shorten the licensing process for energy and critical minerals from several years to a maximum of 28 days. Hundreds of millions of dollars in energy revenue was allocated to oil and gas producing states. An agreement was reached with Mexico to immediately deliver water from the international reservoir to farmers and ranchers in Texas. Reduce red tape, which accounts for 60% of the cost of building and purchasing new laboratories in the Department of Energy. Give the beautiful clean coal industry immunity from the strict regulations on coal-fired power plants in the Biden era. Sign an executive order to revive the clean coal industry that has been neglected by politicians for decades. Sign administrative orders to strengthen the reliability and safety of the power grid. Implement a permanent salary increase for field firefighters. Reopening 1.56 million acres of Alaska's coastal plains for oil and gas leasing, overturning the Biden administration's plan to limit development to the statutory minimum in 2024, distributing high abundance and low enriched uranium to U.S. nuclear power developers is part of President Trump's commitment to releasing all affordable, reliable, and safe U.S. energy sources. Sign a bill to abolish the natural gas tax in the Biden era. After the collapse of California's water system due to devastating wildfires, the bureaucratic red tape of restricting California's water supply was overcome. In October, a record-breaking geothermal rental sale was held, the largest in total revenue of nearly $9.5 million. The rules and regulations on greenhouse gas emissions in the Biden era have been abolished. In the competitive thermal leasing sales of California, Idaho, Nevada, Oregon, and Utah, 141 plots of land with a total area of 451,893 acres were leased, earning a total of $24 million. Sign an executive order to expand the production of key minerals in the United States to reduce dependence on China. The announcement of providing new hunting opportunities on 87,000 acres of land within the National Wildlife Reserve System and the National Fish Hatchery System. The number of hunting opportunities has more than tripled, and the number of open or expanded hunting stations has increased 5 times compared with the Biden administration. May his actions be praised in the parliaments of the nations, and may his name be engraved on the long scroll of history. From the place of sunrise to the place of sunset, everyone should see how he faithfully fulfilled the sacred contract in this year. Whoever has ears should hear, and whoever has eyes will see these 365 great deeds.